The years wear on. Donald hates this place. He hates his crew for making him leave his brother. He hates the engines because none of them are his brother. He hates Sir Topham Hatt for only buying him. He tries not to hate, but he does anyway. One night, he is taking a nighttime goods train over the bridge to Barrow. The world is dark, quiet, and peaceful. Most of the trucks are sound asleep. The only sounds they make are that of their axles creaking and their soft snores as they roll along behind him. This is the kind of train Donald likes to take. Quiet and obedient. He stares up at the inky sky, at the moon and the stars, and thinks of his brother. The raw agony from years ago has softened to a dull ache in his boiler, but it's still painful. He still misses his twin too terribly to put into words. He will never be whole without his brother. He rides on through the night, until the lights of Barrow are visible through the dark. As he rolls into the yard, he can hear diesel horns blaring in the distance. He looks around as his crew go to speak to the guard. Odd shadows dance across the walls and rails, and strange sounds echo across the area, which is lit with an eerie orange glow. Nearby, several grubby diesel engines sit in a dilapidated shed. Some are asleep, some are not. One of them, a hazard-striped shunter, notices him. "Look at that oversized kettle," he says loud enough for Donald to hear. "Heap of old scrap metal. What's he still doing riding the rails?" another replies. "His boss must be crazy keeping around a liability like him," the first one agrees. Donald rolls his eyes and lets off steam crossly. "All right, you lot. You get something to say to me? Come say it to my face and we'll see what happens." When the diesels don't reply, he continues. "What? Were you expecting me to come crying back to my shed?" he sneers. By now his crew have returned and he sets off again before anyone can reply. He leaves his train in an empty siding and finds a turntable to turn around before leaving. Before he can clear the yard, however, they are flagged down by the signalman. His driver leans out of his cab to talk to him. "The points are jammed," he explains. "You will have to take the other way out." He motions towards another line, leading into the shadows. "It's a bit longer. I suppose you can wait if you want, but it might be a while." But Donald wants to get home, doesn't want to hang around this diesel-infested yard any longer than necessary, so they head down the dark line. As they move slowly through the shadows, he can see strange shapes looming at the edges of his lamplight. A cracked funnel here, a dented cab there, something that might be a tender over there, a rusty creaking sound over that way. Donald's boiler runs cold, and he rumbles to a stop. His driver swears he can feel his engine trembling. Why didn't he tell us this line led through a scrapyard? His fireman shrugs. "Let's just get the hell out of here." Donald continues slowly, with some encouragement from his crew. He glances fearfully from side to side, his wheels wobbling. They don't get very far before Donald stops abruptly, startled by a sound like the hiss of steam in the darkness. "What was that?" his driver questions, nervous now too. "It sounded like a steam engine," Donald replies. "But," his fireman shivers, "all the engines here are dead, right?" The spinning of rusted wheels on old rails is suddenly sharp in the silence of the scrapyard. Donald jerks forward, his coupling chains rattling. An old shed looms out of the darkness to his left. "Who's there?" he calls, quietly. At first there's no reply, then a voice. "Are you a Fat Controller's engine?" Donald doesn't hesitate in his reply. "Aye, and you?" "Escaping." Donald frowns, squinting through the night. "Are you to be scrapped, or are you lost?" The voice answers, "Both, but we're fresh out of coal." Before Donald can answer, there is a metallic shuffling out beyond his circle of light. "What was that?" The voice sounds a bit nervous. A second, rather nasally voice responds, "Diesels." "Hush, Toad," the original voice hisses. "You'll get us caught." Donald frowns. "How many of you are there?" "3 in total. I'm Oliver, and that other voice is my brake van, Toad." At that moment, Donald makes a decision. "Hold on, I'm off to get you out of here." Quickly and yet carefully, he reverses and switches over to Oliver's line. His lamp illuminates the interior of the shed and to reveal an old tank engine and a rusted black tender engine, sound asleep. The tank engine, Oliver, starts in surprise, his mouth gaping open. "Douglas! Wake up, you lazy tender! This guy looks exactly like you!" he exclaims. Donald freezes. "I haven't heard that name since I arrived." The other engine moans and pries open his eyes. "Ugh, dinna yell, laddie. Ugh, what's that light?" He squeezes his eyes shut again, to which Oliver huffs, "Open your eyes, Doug, we found him." Donald can hardly believe his eyes. Here his brother is, if not yet safe, then at least in one piece, alive. "Dougie?" As quick as he can, he switches over to Douglas's line and rolls cautiously up. Douglas opens his eyes again and he looks exhausted. "Donnie?" Their buffers meet, and it's the closest thing 2 engines can ever get to a hug. Donald chokes on a sob as he presses closer, pushing his brother into the buffers behind him. You're alive. I thought you'd been scrapped." You're alive. I thought you'd been scrapped." "I thought you were dead," he gasps. Douglas smiles weakly through his own tears. "You think I'd give up that easily?" Donald trembles slightly. "I saw the diesels drag you off. I wanted to go after you, but my crew refused. They said we couldn't afford to get in any more trouble. I fought them on it, but they forced my controls." There's a pause, during which something screeches metal on metal out in the surrounding darkness. You dinna hate me, do you?" Donald whispers shamefully. "No, Donnie," Douglas assures. "You were right to get out while you still could. It gave me comfort knowing you were safe and free." Donald breaks down then, as if this is all he wanted to hear. "I would have let them drag me off too, if it meant I could have stayed with you," he cried. Beside them, Oliver watches with interest. He would have gladly given them some space, but that is rather difficult when he is right beside them and physically unable to move. Guys? I hate to interrupt, but we should probably get our bunkers moving before we get caught," he says instead. "He's right, though," says Donald, calming down some. His crew ventures out from where they'd been talking to Oliver's crew. There's no sign of Douglas's crew, and no one mentions them. He couples the twins before climbing into his cab and reversing up the siding. Soon, Oliver and Toad are coupled to Douglas, and the cavalcade sets off through the scrapyard. It takes a while, the group startling at every unidentifiable sound and random light, But eventually they are racing down the main line, bound for Sodor. The sun is just beginning to break over the horizon as they cross the Vickerstown drawbridge, and Donald whistles for the first time in years, high and joyful.